Hi everyone, my name is Shea Damonze. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and today I'm going to be talking about my journey through addiction. I'm going to go back to where it all started. Basically, growing up born in Cape Town, South Africa, being exposed to various types of drugs all around me from a very young age. Also being exposed to gambling at about the age of 8. I think my journey of abusing substances and having gone through addiction really stems from early childhood. I remember as an 8-year-old kid being in a corner cafe where we would normally play video games or these type of arcade games, and there was a little slot machine in this cafe, and I was always fascinated by people coming in, putting money in the slot machine, the symbols, the lights spinning all around, and bells going off when someone had won a jackpot, really. So for me as an 8-year-old, I then drifted from playing normal video arcade games and started putting my money into the slot machine. It was very much thrill-seeking at the time, thinking back now, because it was about winning and losing. So if I had lost money, I became really sad and depressed, and I would find myself going out trying to find more money so that I could win back the money that I had lost, but not realizing that this was me getting into a vicious cycle at the age of 8 years old already. When people ask me about my addiction and where it started, generally I would have said my addiction started at the age of 12, where I started abusing substances. But the reality is my addiction started at the age of 8 because I started gambling. And this was kind of hard to understand, but years later, looking at my addiction, looking at the progression with my behavior, it was no different to me using substances. So my addiction really started at the age of 8 with gambling. By 12 years old, I then went on and started experimenting with other kids at school, exploring alcohol, weed, which we call bangi in Tanzania. And I think by the age of 14, my addiction had already progressed, where at 14 years old, I was probably using every known street drug and pharmaceutical drug which was available at the time. So from crack cocaine, heroin, alcohol, cannabis, ecstasy, hallucinogenics, LSD, mushrooms, all of those things, the list goes on and on. So at the age of 14, my addiction really took off, where I found myself engaging in really destructive behaviors. And when I talk about destructive behaviors, I found myself also in very high-risk situations as a result of the people I was with, the things I was doing, and just in terms of my addiction as a whole. If I think about my addiction, or me being in active addiction when I was still out there using and gambling, a lot of my acting out behavior was purely centered around wanting to escape a certain reality, escape certain feelings. At the time, I was not obviously aware that my addiction was helping me to basically cope with these feelings. But with addiction being a progressive illness, my addiction just spiraled out of control. You know, it started at one point where it was all very much fun. There were good times. I will not dismiss the fact that I enjoyed using drugs. However, I was not aware on the journey and the dark road that my addiction would take me down. So going back to early teens, as I've mentioned previously, having gone through various types of drugs, experimenting, there were a load of consequences that came with my addiction and my behaviors and the choices that I made abusing substances. There were a lot of consequences with my behaviors in terms of gambling or acting out sexually, a lot of high-risk behavior, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of peer pressure as well. And again, being involved in addiction kind of took me into a whole different world. And this world was centered around other users, addicts, criminals. So I got involved in a lot of crime, drug dealing. I've basically seen the gates of hell as a result of my addiction. everyone that was around me who loved me in terms of my family and friends, I hurt as a result of my addiction, right? It was not my intention to hurt anyone, but being under the influence of a substance and driven and motivated to use became my priority. Getting high by any which way or means was priority, was top of the list. I think I entered my first rehabilitation center at the age of 18 years old. And every time I found myself going into rehab, it was always to get either family members off my back, to make other people happy, but there was no desire within myself to really want to stop and change my life. And this continued for a good couple of years. If I think back now, going into that first treatment center, I was kind of cornered. I was bust, right? So my family was really disappointed, and it was suggested that I go into treatment and seek help. And again, I was not ready to stop using. And if I'm really honest, I did not want to stop using at that time. For me, it was still very much about the good times and the fun times that I'm using, and not really accepting the fact that my life was going down the tubes and I was in serious trouble. Even being involved in all of those things that I mentioned, gangsterism, crime, a lot of dark places and people I've been around with. I think my denial was so big at the time that I was not able to see through this. And this is what basically kept me trapped in my addiction. Even the other people tried to point out my behavior, tried to point out that my life was really on kind of roller coaster where it was heading one way only, and that was either jail or death. I'd been to multiple institutions before, psychiatric clinics, rehabs, detox facilities, and every single time I came out of treatment, I found myself going back to using drugs again. And for me, it was really just about numbing the pain eventually. I used drugs to feel normal, and most people don't really understand that, but I think other addicts and alcoholics out there would understand what I mean when I say I ended up using just so that I could function, or what I thought was functioning at the time. So as a result of this, over the years, if I look back at how my addiction progressed from an 8-year-old kid gambling at a slot machine, winning a bit of money, going on to exploring and using various other drugs, heroin mainly being my drug of choice. You know, I fed my happiness basically through a syringe, through a glass pipe, or whatever substance I could find. Anything outside of myself to make me feel okay on the inside. That is what my addiction was really about. Unfortunately, along the way, I hurt a lot of people. I disappointed a lot of people. I hurt a lot of people emotionally, physically, financially. My family got to a point where they just had enough. I remember being about 19 or 20 years old, living on the streets, going to my dad one night in the heart of winter, storming. You know, I'd been wearing and living in the same clothes for probably 3 months already, living on the streets, sleeping in a public toilet at a gas station, and going to my dad one night and asking him just for a blanket and a piece of bread. My dad refused to open up the door for me, and he said, "I wish that you were dead so that I can at least get some sleep tonight." And I got so furious and angry, and I thought, how does a father tell his son that I wish that you were dead, rather, you know? But now, being in recovery 14 years later, as a dad myself, I look back and I think, what was my part in all of this? What did I do to actually get my dad to saying something like this? I must have really hurt and damaged my relationship and hurt this man a great deal for a father to be able to say this to his own son. So being in recovery now, it's given me an opportunity to really take stock and look at my part, you know, not being the victim anymore. Unfortunately, my addiction took me to all these places, made me do really bad things, made me kind of go on a very self-destructive path where I took hostages with me, family members namely, friends as well. And being in recovery today, it's about looking at my part and taking responsibility for the harms that I've done. And with taking responsibility for myself now, being in recovery, it means that, and this is what it means to me, it might be different for everyone else, but what it really means to me is that today I've got a choice, 14 years later. I know that if I pick up a substance, I'm going back to square one. I'm not going to start my journey all over again. I'm going to pick up where I left off. And where I left off, I got clean in 2008. Like I said, I was living on the streets, sleeping in public toilets, sleeping in various people's cars, doing loads of things that were not things to be proud of. I made a lot of bad choices. But if I really get honest about my addiction in terms of the choices that I made, again, it was all driven by the inability to stop using. My addiction was purely around that. Even though I wanted to stop, even though I did not want to hurt those people and disappoint them, I just couldn't find a way out of it. 2008 was the last time that I had used, and again, thinking back now, 14 years later, coming back to the point, today I've got a choice. Today I've got a choice to either stay clean or not. Today I've got a choice to take responsibility for my life. Where if someone offers me a drink or a drug, I know that this is going to take me back to where I had left off. And that is in 2008, and that is a place that I really don't want to go back to. So being in recovery today has really given me an opportunity to look at my life and take stock of it, and also make the best out of life and really start living. Because in my addiction, I was merely just existing from day to day. I had no goals, no motivation. All my dreams basically just went out the window completely. My dream was always to become a psychologist, and I was kicked out of school as a result of my addiction. And what had happened was I ended up doing all those things and going through this journey of addiction. Fortunately, 2008, I had probably the last opportunity to go into treatment, and I made a success of it. I spent 6 months in treatment where the focus was really just around my addiction, and also looking at myself and acknowledging the hurt and the damages that I had caused onto others and to myself, most importantly. And this is where I decided to change my life. Thinking back to what it was like being out there on the streets, hustling every day, being caught by cops, being arrested every time, being locked up, committing various crimes, waking up, going through withdrawal symptoms every day, having to use something to feel normal. When I was in treatment, I woke up one day and I thought, well, this is not that bad. I don't have cops waiting outside my house ready to bust me, with drugs or arrest me or anything. My house is not under surveillance by police any longer. I'm waking up and I'm able to do the things that I want to do today. Because when I was using, I had no choice. This is what addiction does. It takes my choice away. The only choice that I've got is that I need to use more drugs in order to feel okay. I need to use more drugs to escape my reality, to numb myself and block out anything that I'm trying to feel at that time. Being in recovery gave me an opportunity to really experience life and start living. So, today I sit here as the managing director of a company called Evolve. In 2008, after getting clean, my journey continued, where I did not end up becoming the psychologist that I always dreamed about. I actually became a certified and recognized addiction and trauma professional, something that I would never ever have imagined in my entire life. Living on the streets, sleeping in a public toilet, like I said, those dreams were just gone. I thought that I was going to die that way. 14 years later, I'm sitting in a beautiful country, Tanzania, being interviewed, being able to share my story and hopefully help someone else out there with my story and my journey through addiction. And again, like I've mentioned, this was beyond my wildest dream. I would never ever have thought that I would get clean. Being a heroin addict, living on the streets, I just thought, well, this is the way my life is going to end. I was preparing for that. There were multiple suicide attempts as well. There was multiple psychosis with using various drugs. It got to a point where I was completely broken, hopeless, and defeated by my addiction. I just thought that there was no way out. However, there was a turnaround, like I said, in 2008, where I was given the opportunity to go into treatment, and I grabbed it with both hands. Going into treatment, I started taking responsibility for my life. I took ownership of the damages that I had caused to other people. And this was probably one of the breaking points where I was able to see through the cloud of denial. You know, everything that my addiction told me in my head, even though living on the streets, I probably weighed 40 odd kilograms, living in the same clothes for 3 months, torn pants, broken shoes, looking like someone who's basically been living on the streets for years. So thinking back to where I was and where I am right now, I am really grateful. I don't regret my journey of addiction. What I do regret, though, is the hurt and the damages which I've caused to everyone around me, whether it be family members, loved ones, my community. But my experience has brought me to a point where I'm able to assist and help other people get clean and sober today. And this is my passion. This is what drives me on a daily basis. It's no longer heroin cooked up in a needle or a piece of crack on a crack pipe that inspires me or motivates me to get through my day. It's about waking up with a passion and a desire to really want to help people. And this is what I'm set out to do. This is what I'm really motivated and passionate about doing. So as a recovering addict and having gone through all these challenges, through my addiction and these hurdles, and having been on both sides of the fence really, today I'm able to sit and really reflect on where I was, look back at my story, and look at where I'm at now, and really be grateful for the opportunity that I've been given and the gift of recovery, which we call it, because it's really a gift. It's basically being given another chance at life. And this is what you really hold close to on a daily basis, because again, I am no different to anyone else. You know, if I pick up a drink or a drug or any acting out self-destructive behavior, which I engage in, any addictive behaviors, I will go back to where I picked up or where I left off. You know, I'll go straight back to where I left off, and I will be back on that roller coaster, on a downward spiral, and I will probably not be sitting here today. So today, I've made the choice to make something of my life, and on a daily basis, again, like I've mentioned before, I make the choice to stay clean and sober. And by doing that, I know life is not going to be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than where I've come from.